Hi everybody, welcome back to my channel, and if you're new to my channel, hello, my name is Gabby and welcome. If you've never been here before, have no idea what I do here on my channel, I cover true crime cases, and basically all the cases that I cover are a little bit more on the vintage side. They're all basically 20 years or older, so if that's something that you might be interested in, maybe go down below, click that subscribe button, and also turn on the post notifications to be notified every time that I upload. I do recommend turning on the post notifications because my uploads are very sporadic. Today I have another unsolved murder for you all, and I know there are a lot of people out there who do not enjoy unsolved cases. I know that's really weird because a lot of us do like a mystery. Although we want the case solved, we do enjoy a good mystery, but there are a lot of people out there who do not like unsolved cases because it's kind of one of those, well, you know, I want answers type thing, and I'm the same way. Now, today's case is an unsolved murder. It's one that is very gruesome, very sad, and it's one though that has everything going for it. I mean, there's all of the evidence required, there's DNA on file, everything like that. So it can eventually be solved, but it just hasn't been solved yet. So with all that being said, let's get right into the case. Today we are discussing the unsolved murder of Diane Olkwitz. During the later part of 1966, a 10-year-old little girl was found sexually assaulted, beaten, and stabbed to death in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Debbie Olkwitz heard of the gruesome crime that took place only about 20 miles southeast from her home, and she confided in her older sister how terrified she was that someone was out there running around who was capable of doing such a thing to a girl that was so close to her own age. Her older sister, Diane, reassured her that they lived in the quiet area of Menomonee Falls, that something like that would never happen where they were. Diane, though, would be wrong, because about 2 months later, she herself would become the victim in a very similar crime. Diane Olkwitz was born to parents Robert and Irene Olkwitz on September 27th of the year 1947. Diane was one of 6 children. She had 2 older brothers, Dennis and Edward. She had an older sister, Nancy, and 2 younger sisters, Patty and Debbie. The Olkwitz family was extremely close. All the siblings got along very well. It was a very loving environment for the children growing up. The family also lived right down the block from their church, which was St. Mary Catholic Church. So the family was Catholic, and they were very involved in their church, and they just really cherished their religion greatly. Diane, growing up, was known for being outgoing, caring, just all around a sweet girl who loved God. She was the type where anytime she had to make a huge decision in her life, she would go to her church and pray to God to help guide her in the right direction. Anytime she had any problem in life, she brought it to her church to seek answers. In high school, Diane didn't really date much. She dated a little bit here and there, but nothing ever really became too serious with her and the boys that she saw. But after graduating from Menomonee Falls High School, she met a man named Donald Heirlmeyer, and they fell in love fast. And not much long after, Donald asked her to be his wife. Around the same time that Donald asked Diane to be his wife, and she said yes, Diane started a job as a secretary at Kenworth Manufacturing Company. She then decided to move out of her family home, and she ended up getting an apartment with her brother Edward's girlfriend. By late 1966, Diane was 19 years old, and she had blossomed into this beautiful, tall, brunette girl with a great sense of humor who was really just a good influence for her 2 younger sisters. They looked up to her so much. On the outside, Diane looked like, it looked like she had the perfect life. She was out of her parents' house, had a job, was engaged, but her life took an all too common sad turn at this time when Donald would get drafted for the Army. He was sent down to Fort Hood, Texas for his basic training. Life became dull for Diane at this time. Life became mundane. Diane, though, wasn't the one to sit around and sulk. She decided to pick up some hobbies, some things to keep her busy in her spare time, things to get her mind off of the loneliness that she felt. She was still working at Kenworth Manufacturing Company, but in the evening she decided to sign up for classes like swimming classes and knitting classes, and she also even took up a second job as a hostess at a restaurant in the area called Dutchland Dairy. Diane was really trying to make her life her own, trying to do what she had to do to not succumb to the feelings she may be feeling. She definitely was keeping herself very busy during this time, with her main focus being, of course, her secretary job at Kenworth. When it comes to Kenworth Manufacturing Company was a plant that stamped metal, and it was located on West Silver Spring Drive in Menomonee Falls. The main factory workers there would work their normal shifts, which ended at 3:30 p.m., but since Diane was the secretary, her shift ended an hour later at 4:30 p.m. She stayed later to take any late deliveries at the plant, answer any late phone calls, and get everything ready for the next day. She was the only secretary there, so she had a great deal of responsibility to make sure things were in order every single day. If you can't tell already, Diane had a routine pretty much every day of her life, and part of her routine was after she got off from work, she would go pick up her best friend from her workplace and drive her home. Her best friend's name was also Diane, but her name was Diane Zimmer. They were insanely close, so much so that Diane was her maid of honor at the Zimmers' wedding. Like I said, routine was a part of Diane's life. She knew what to expect pretty much every single day. But something occurred on November 3rd of 1966 that she nor anyone else had planned for. On November 3rd, Diane Zimmer waited at her place of work for her friend to pick her up. Time ticked by and Diane had not come by to pick her friend up. This was not like Diane, and her best friend had a feeling that if she did get another ride, that instead of just going home, she should go to Kenworth Manufacturing Company and check things out, see where her best friend was and if everything was okay. Diane Zimmer spoke to her boss's wife and told her what was going on. Her boss's wife was more than happy to drive her over to Kenworth. They drove over to the plant and started their way to the front door. Before trying to go inside, Diane looked through the front window of the building. She immediately saw Diane's purse on the front desk and coat on the coat rack. Now, when you think about it, maybe Diane was just inside somewhere finishing up some work. That's what her best friend hoped for. She tried to unlock the door, but no luck. It was locked. They knocked and knocked, but there was no answer. Where was Diane? Diane Zimmer and her boss's wife went next door to where Diane's brother worked and asked him how they could get into Kenworth, because Diane had not showed up normally to pick her up and her belongings were still inside the building. So Diane had to be inside the building. The three all walked over to Kenworth to see if they could get inside. Just as they were walking back, it was almost 5:30 p.m. at this time, and the supervisor was walking up to the building to go inside. The three told him what was going on with Diane, and the four of them made their way inside the building to try to locate Diane. The four that I'm referring to are, of course, Diane Zimmer, Diane Zimmer's boss's wife who drove her to the plant, Diane Olkwitz's brother, and the supervisor of the plant. The four of them went through the main shipping room door, and about 20 feet from that door lay Diane's body, surrounded by a huge pool of blood. The four of them stood in shock. They panicked. Their blood ran cold. They experienced a feeling many unfortunate souls have felt before. One we can only hope that we never experience ourselves. Diane had been stabbed in her chest, neck, and head, but it's the number of stab wounds. Diane was stabbed 106 times, all by a knife with a 3.5-inch blade. Some of the stab wounds deeper than others. All right after one another, over and over and over again, 106 times. The Waukesha County coroner at the time was a man named James Welch, and other than what I just stated, he also determined that she had not been sexually assaulted, which is surprising in itself because when she was found, her dress was pulled up and her underwear had been messed with. If sex wasn't the motive, then what was? Was it robbery? Well, nothing was taken from Diane's purse and nothing was taken from the company. There was also no signs of forced entry. As soon as Diane was murdered, authorities started working, and they started working hard. Right away, they closed off the location of the scene, started questioning everyone who knew Diane, and started looking into the backgrounds of everyone who worked at the plant, which it's good that they did that. They also kept an eye on the plant, thinking the killer may return at any point. But the killer never did. Within weeks after the murder, they interviewed over 500 people, asking them about Diane, their relationship to her, and of course, if they knew anyone who may have had it out for her. Since Diane was such a liked individual with no known enemies, people closest to her knew it couldn't have been someone Diane had a feud with in some way. She didn't really have tension with anyone in her life. She was a sweet girl who tried to make others feel appreciated and thought of. She kept to herself and got her work done. That was Diane. I barely use the word ghastly on my channel. I feel like it's not a word regularly in my vocabulary, but Diane's murder was ghastly. And it from everything having to do with her murder, all of the clues, the crime scene, how she had been killed, everything, police and everyone surrounding her had a feeling it had to have been a crime of passion. I mean, who is going to take the time to not only take someone's life in such a horrible way, but stab them 106 times? It had to have been someone who knew Diane, maybe not very well, but to everyone, they just thought that it had to be someone who knew Diane, that it had to be someone who had some sort of vengeance towards her. Someone who came into that building at the right time, knew that nobody else was going to be around, and took Diane's life while also having the time to stab her so many times. Authorities and her loved ones felt it had to have been somebody who knew Diane and had animosity towards her. Police questioned Diane's family and friends and asked them, is there anybody who may have been obsessed with Diane? Was she scared of anybody who had been kind of stalking her? Was there anything going on in Diane's life like that? Was there anyone they could think of? Well, her family members did think of one person, someone that Diane had recently told some family members about that overall just scared her. It was someone who definitely desired Diane and asked her out on multiple occasions, even though he knew that she had a fiance. This was someone she made it very clear to that she had zero interest in them, but they kept insisting she give them a chance. This someone just so happened to be her employer's son, which, it kind of makes sense also because there were no signs of forced entry at the plant. If it was her employer's son, he would know everyone's schedule at the plant. He would know Diane's schedule. He would know the perfect time to go, and he would most likely have a key to get into the building. That it makes perfect sense. If I was in law enforcement at the time, I'd be like, ding, 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 like this is our person. This man was looked into and he was questioned on quite a few occasions. Everything with him though completely checked out, which is very surprising, but he had a strong alibi and his fingerprints did not match the fingerprints that they obtained from the crime scene. Other than this employer's son, there was also about 5 other people that authorities had their eye on for possibly being involved, but again, they all checked out with solid alibis and their fingerprints did not match the crime scene ones. So near the beginning of Diane's case, they had questioned over 500 people. They had narrowed it down to this employer's son and then also, 5 other people. And there have been a lot of times in cases where these strong alibis were not so strong, and years later, the people who lied for the individual came forward and said, they weren't in this place where I said they were, and then turns out that the person that they lied for was actually involved in the murder or the disappearance. But other than having these strong alibis, none of their fingerprints matched to the fingerprints at the crime scene. So they all checked out completely and police had to move on. And over time, police were running out of leads, they were running out of theories, and overall they were running out of hope that this case would be solved anytime soon. And it wasn't just the police, it wasn't just her family, it was pretty much the entire area of Menomonee Falls that was just hoping that Diane's case was solved soon. Because other than this poor girl having her life taken in such a tragic way, there was this madman or madmen out on the street that were capable of doing such a horrible thing. I mean, people in the area, they were scared. Since this case does take place in Menomonee Falls, I do want to kind of touch on the area a little bit. Menomonee Falls, Wisconsin is a village in Waukesha County, and from my research during the 50s and 60s, the village's population was increasingly growing. There were thousands upon thousands of new people moving into the area as the years went on, and it was growing so fast that during the 60s, there were 6 new schools built in the area, and of course because of the increase in children due to the baby boom era. Like I said, the area was booming, but it was not used to crime. Diane's murder was really the first big murder of Menomonee Falls to ever occur. I mean, this murder shook the village. People were terrified that there was this new person in the area lurking around that may take the life of someone else in a similar way. People started watching their children more closely, locking their doors at nights, which of course you're supposed to anyway, but they were buying weapons to help protect them, and also there was a huge increase in sales of big dogs. Everyone was wanting a guard dog. Authorities had a lot of eyes on them to solve her murder, but they had finally hit a dead end in the case, and unfortunately, the case went cold. It went cold, but that doesn't mean that people just gave up. They still tried everything they could to solve it, especially every time there was a huge advancement in forensic technology. Based on my research, they really have everything they need to solve this case, but it just has not been solved yet. Everything has just not fallen into place yet. They obtained a good deal of evidence from the crime scene. Other than fingerprints, also DNA. DNA that 100% did not belong to Diane, and they think most likely belongs to the killer. They have taken this DNA that they have on file and have created an entire DNA profile of the man that they think is responsible for the murder, and they have entered this DNA into CODIS in recent years. If you're not familiar with what CODIS is, it is the FBI's Combined DNA Index System, and it's a system where they keep all convicted offenders' DNA on file. They have taken the alleged murderer's DNA and have run it through CODIS many times and still no match. Apparently, the person responsible for Diane's murder is not a convicted offender. They're not in the system. It doesn't seem like they went on in later years to commit any other serious crimes. Police have taken the DNA samples and compared it to many earlier suspects in Diane's murder, and they all checked out completely checked out, except for one. Now, can you take a guess which that one is? If you guessed her employer's son, you guessed right. The facts are that after DNA comparison became more commonly used, authorities really wanted to compare the killer's DNA to the DNA of Diane's employer's son. But he had passed away in the year 1991, and unfortunately his body was cremated. And they also are unsure of where his ashes are even located in general. But even if they knew where his ashes were, you can't do DNA comparison to ashes. Authorities were determined, though, to see if there was a match to this man's DNA. So much so that they even exhumed the remains of his parents, one of those, of course, being Diane's employer back in 1966. So they dug up her employer and his wife, and they tested the DNA to the DNA of Diane's alleged killer, and it was not a match. Now, even though the DNA found at the crime scene, the DNA that is supposed to be the DNA of Diane's killer, was not directly compared to her employer's son's DNA, they still, all in all, have come to the conclusion that it doesn't seem like her murderer was actually her employer's son. He hasn't checked out completely 100%, but based on their testing at this point, and considering he was cremated, that's pretty much all the testing that they'll be able to do. To them, it doesn't seem like he was the murderer. Now, when it comes to suspects and information surrounding Diane's murder, that is pretty much all of the information online about it, or at least all the information that I could find. But I did on my own do a little bit of digging into other crimes in Wisconsin around that time, and it brought me down another separate rabbit hole. You remember at the beginning, the very beginning of this video, when I mentioned the young girl who was murdered about 2 months before Diane was murdered? Her name was Julia V. Beckwith. She was a little over a month shy of her 11th birthday when she was murdered on September 3rd, 1966 in Milwaukee. She had been stabbed just like Diane, but she had been also beaten and sexually assaulted, which Diane wasn't. In Julia's murder, to authorities, it seemed like it was sexually motivated above all. In Diane's case, she had not been sexually assaulted in any way, so to them, it didn't seem like the two were related. They were also very different in age. It's not impossible for a serial killer to go after victims that possess different characteristics, but police didn't really think the two were connected. 2 days before Julia's murder, though, a woman in public was slashed by a man who asked her to pull her car over to the side, acting like he wanted some help with something. He was driving a gray Chevrolet. She said it looked like a 56 model, but she wasn't sure. He ran away as soon as she began to scream after he slashed her. Of course, 2 days later, Julia was killed. Then, on October 16th of 1966, 18-year-old Cheryl Thompson was found by her own brother behind a Catholic church. She was almost completely nude, and she had been stabbed to death, a total of 22 times. Then on November 11th, a girl named Kathleen Dreyer had a similar incident happen to her as the first woman. Kathleen Dreyer was 11 years old. She had been slashed by a man and left to bleed in an alley in Milwaukee by a man who escaped in what was described as a gray 1957 Chevrolet. She, like the first woman, thankfully lived though. And another thankful aspect to this incident was that a boy spotted this man's car at a gas station not long after and called police immediately. The man was caught, the man responsible for all this. The man was named Michael Lee Harrington. This man had actually been questioned after Julia's murder, but was released because they didn't think that he was involved. Michael Lee Harrington had confessed to killing Julia and Cheryl, and also he confessed to the attempted murder of Kathleen Dreyer. I couldn't find any information though when it came to the first woman and what happened to her, but he was sentenced to 2 life terms for the 2 murders, with an additional 30 years stacked on top of that for attempted murder. Now, the reason that I bring this up is because all of these crimes had to do with stabbings or slashings, and it took place in Milwaukee, an area not too far from where Diane was killed. He confessed to the crimes, but says that he had nothing to do with Diane's murder, and it seemed like DNA checks out in his case too. They compared the alleged killer's DNA to his DNA and wasn't a match. There's absolutely no evidence to show that he took the life of Diane. But for a period of time, with everything that he did, all of the horrible things that he did, they really thought that this could have been their man as well, but with DNA testing, he checked out. This case is so frustrating. So, yet again, another lead that went absolutely nowhere. From my research though, there had been quite a few other unsolved stabbings in Wisconsin in the 1960s, of course, it's a big state. But as of right now, Diane's murder has not been linked to any of them. When it comes to Menomonee Falls though, in particular, I personally couldn't find much information on serious similar crimes in that area. The main one I came across was a woman named Joyce Garter, who was a 54-year-old woman who was stabbed to death in her home on May 9th of 1981. To my knowledge, though, of course, that's a big gap in time, but authorities didn't think the two were related in any way. I mean, there's different characteristics to them, but I mean, they occurred 14 years apart. After all these years, though, Diane's case has never been closed, and they still have every bit of paperwork having to do with it. Authorities say that, of course, they do not know if the DNA at the crime scene is 100% the killer's DNA, but it's their main bit of hope at this point, and they just need to find a match to it and go from there. Her case is still open, and even after 54 years, after all that time, after half a decade, tips still come in to the Waukesha Police Department about Diane's case. Unfortunately, though, none of the tips so far have turned into anything promising. When I say that Diane's death, Diane's murder, the loss of Diane affected people to their core, I mean it. Her family tried their hardest to stay strong, but the sadness and the stress of losing her in such a horrible way, it seems like it got to all of them eventually, especially her parents. Both died younger than they should have. Her mother, Irene, died at the age of 50 in 1973 from heart failure, and her father, Robert, died in 1976 from a heart attack. Diane's sister, Nancy, passed away at the age of 58, and Diane's brother, Dennis, who tried so hard through the years to solve his sister's case, died from a stroke at the age of 50, same as his mother, is 50 years old. As if that isn't enough sadness, Diane's fiance returned to his base after Diane's funeral and lived a heartbroken life until he was killed in Vietnam in 1968. The only two left are Patty, Debbie, and Edward, and none of them are giving up hope when it comes to the case. They just believe it's a matter of time before they find the person responsible for taking her away from them. If you have any information you believe may help solve Diane's murder, contact Lieutenant Steve Rudy of the Menomonee Falls Police Department at 262-532-8705. To submit a tip anonymously, contact Crime Stoppers of Waukesha County at 888-441-5505 or online at stopcrimewaukesha.com. So, that is the case of Diane Olkwitz, and it is such a sad case. Had any of you heard of this case before? I hadn't until I randomly came across it. And of course, one of the titles of the article was how it was a young woman who had been stabbed 106 times. And I mean, I just read into it and I couldn't believe the information start 106 times. I definitely have to agree with her loved ones and authorities that it had to have been a crime of passion. I don't think it was somebody who just randomly decided to stab somebody that many times, just out of nowhere. I do also genuinely agree with the majority when they think that it had to have been somebody who had some sort of connection to the plant, who knew the schedule, knew that nobody else was going to be there. I definitely think it just had to have been somebody who had a very strong connection to the plant. And when I started looking into this case, my eyes definitely narrowed in on the employer's son, but they did do, of course, the DNA test directly to his parents. So, I mean, I really don't know what to think with this one. And of course, there's the horrible crimes of Michael Lee Harrington, but it doesn't seem like he was involved with Diane's death because he did admit to his crimes and he really had nothing to lose at that point. I mean, he was already sitting behind bars for so long, so it doesn't seem like he also took the life of Diane. It's just, I mean, you never really know. It could have been somebody who was working at the plant who had some sort of obsession with Diane, some sort of stalker that she just really didn't know about. It could have been anything, it could have been anyone, but due to the fact that she wasn't sexually assaulted and that nothing was really taken from her purse, no money was taken from the company, nothing was taken. It seems like it was just somebody who hated Diane for whatever reason. And yes, this case is over a century old, but cases this old have been solved before, so I just hope that it can eventually be solved. And it does seem like at this point, for it to be solved, it is going to take something like genetic genealogy to solve it. So it may just take time with that. But most people do believe that this case is solvable, and that should give us some bit of hope. Like always, leave any thoughts or opinions that you have about this case down below in the comments. And of course, leave some love down in the comments as well for any of her remaining family members who may stumble across this video. And thank you for spending a little bit of time out of your day to learn about this case that has definitely been on my mind recently and I wanted to share on my channel. And I hope you all have an amazing rest of your day, and I will see you all in the next one.